Hola, buenos días, chicos y chicas. Espero que estén súper bien. Let's hop right in. So, from the beginning of my language learning journey, people have always told me that I have a really good accent when I'm speaking Spanish. Like, my pronunciation is really good. And I'm not trying to brag or anything, guys. Like, there's a lot of areas in which I still struggle with Spanish. But it's true that I feel like probably my strongest point is my pronunciation, my accent. If you're curious, you can check out some of my other videos where I'm speaking Spanish. But I've been thinking a lot lately, like, why is that the case? Why is that something I've never struggled with? And I came to the conclusion that, in my personal opinion, I think that it has a lot to do with being a musician. And so I wanted to make this video where I talk about that, and I also talk about some other ways that being a musician can also make you a better language learner. So the first one is related directly to the whole pronunciation thing, and it's that musicians have really good ears, right? What, don't you like these ears? No. What I mean is, of course, we're able to learn songs by ear. We're able to listen to something and analyze it in real time. It's our entire practice of being a musician is auditory, right? Of course, there's also things like reading sheet music, and there's the more like theoretical aspect of music. But I mean, there's so many great musicians around the world who don't read music and who do everything by ear, and so it's evident that that's really the only thing that you need to be a good musician is to have a good ear. That's really the most important thing. And some of the ways that musicians specifically are able to strengthen their ears are with the process of listening to something and mimicking it, which is basically the process of learning something by ear, right? If you want to learn something by ear, you're listening to it, and then you try to copy that thing on your instrument. And this is the same process that I used to improve my pronunciation in Spanish, right? I would listen to a native Spanish speaker, and then, I would listen to the nuances, the cadence of their voice, like the tones they were using, and then I would try to copy that exactly. And because I'm a musician, I already have a lot of experience with that process, and so I feel like that was easier for me to do. In a similar vein, musicians are able to orally, like with their ears, recognize different patterns. I mean, obviously that's a skill everyone's able to do, but musicians just have a lot of practice with it, right? Because that's how we're able to follow along when we're playing with a band, or like make sense of something that we're hearing and then translate it to what we're playing. And it's the same process with language learning. Like, you have to be able to listen to something and recognize those patterns so that you can reproduce them. So that's the first way that being a musician makes you a better language learner. The second thing I wanted to talk about is the idea of muscle memory. So first, I think it's important to highlight that while muscle memory does like refer to a physical thing that we're doing, it is a process that happens in the brain, right? It's like you developing new neural connections to help you do processes more easily. A lot of times non-musicians will see musicians doing something like really cool, really effortlessly, and it will almost seem like magic to them, right? Like if you see a piano player playing a really difficult piece and their fingers are just like gliding across the keyboard, or you're watching a band play and like the guitarist is just like going off, but at the same time he's having a conversation with the drummer. It shows a high level of musicianship, yes, and it also shows that they have made these movements into a muscle memory sort of thing. And we also know that in language learning, that's very important, because if you're constantly thinking about conjugations, about sentence structure, synonyms, like your pronunciation too, you're not going to achieve that fluency that you're looking for. The only way to achieve that is to practice those things so much that they become muscle memory for you. Same thing that musicians do, right? So that's a process that I've already gone through a lot with learning instruments and learning music, that to translate that to learning a language, it was very natural for me. So I'm going on to the last point here. This is going to be like a super short video, guys. The last one is that the different practice techniques that you use when practicing an instrument are very similar to a lot of the practice techniques you use when practicing a language, when learning a language. For example, a lot of times we talk about the idea of practice makes perfect, right? It's pretty obvious, right? The more you practice, the better you get at something. But there's a lot of other hobbies apart from music where that's like not not necessarily the case, or like not as important. For example, some other hobbies that I'm into besides just like learning languages and music are like cooking. I really like cooking. I'm into rock climbing. I like photography. A while ago, I got really into origami. That was a little random. But these are all things that are really fulfilling for me. Like, they bring me a lot of joy. But I don't really need to practice them perfectly or be super consistent with them in order to, like, see progress, to enjoy it, to improve. But with music, I definitely don't feel that way, because if I'm not consistently practicing, I'm not going to be able to learn new pieces, you know? And it's the same thing with language learning. If I'm not consistent with it, I'm going to be constantly forgetting things. I'm not going to be improving. So the consistency is just so important for both things. And again, that was something I learned way before I started learning Spanish, just from being a musician. So I was able to transition to language learning and use those skills from music to help me. The other thing related to practice and methodology is that musicians are really used to targeting their weak spots. For example, like as a public school music teacher, as someone who gives private piano lessons, like one-on-one, I see this all the time. When a student is learning a new piece of music, what they'll often do is start like right at the beginning of the piece every time. And that's just not going to help you out, right? And the reason for that is because you have to find those areas, you have to find those weak areas and focus 90% of your energy there. So for example, like instead of starting at the beginning of a piece, when I'm learning it or when I'm helping a student practice, I'll have them start at the end of the piece or even the middle of the piece, and then like work backwards or work different sections instead of always just going from the beginning to the end. And so having that mindset of targeting the weak areas is really important for language learning as well, because the way that you're going to improve, like I said, is if you're using 95% of your time and your energy to target those weak areas. It's definitely a lot more difficult to do. It takes more like willpower, because we automatically default to wanting to do the things that we're better at. But it's the way we're going to improve. So yeah, those are just some random ideas I had, guys, on a Friday morning about different ways that being a musician has helped me with my language learning journey. But I'm also curious to hear from you guys. If you are a musician who is also learning a language, do you feel like it's influenced your journey at all? Do you feel like it's influenced your process at all? And then I can't close out this video without talking about one more thing that is a really interesting topic. It's the idea of whether or not music is a language. Oftentimes it's just taken for granted. People will be like, oh yeah, music's a language. They just say it as if it's the truth. But I remember I had a professor in my undergrad that was like very against that statement. He was a music history professor. And he pointed out a lot of reasons for that being the case. And I remember one argument that he had is he said, if we're going to accept that music's a language, let's at least dilute the metaphor a little bit and instead say that like each genre is a language. I do think that's a much better metaphor, because let's say someone is like a super good bluegrass musician, like they're a bluegrass musician. They play in a bluegrass band and they play the fiddle and that's just their thing. If you just throw them in like a rock band, like they're not necessarily going to know what to do unless they've studied and played that music before. Similar to if you're someone who speaks like Spanish and then you get thrown in an environment where everyone's speaking Chinese, you're also going to be like equally lost. And then if you're someone who's learning multiple genres of music, like let's say me, for example, I like play jazz, hip hop, classical. Each one of those is like its own language with its own vocabulary, its own norm, its own culture as well, of course. And so I think that metaphor is a lot stronger, like seeing each genre of music, each style of music has its own language. Although even then, the metaphor still kind of falls apart a little bit, because one thing is the more genres of music you play, the more you're able to like pick up new genres and new musical things a lot quicker, because I think there's a lot more interrelation. Whereas like, yes, it's true that if you've learned, I don't know, Spanish and French and Chinese, let's say, yes, it would probably be easier for you to learn Hungarian, but you're still going to start at square zero. You're still going to start not knowing a singular word of Hungarian, and it's still going to take you years and years and years to master the language. So again, I just don't love that metaphor of music being a language, but I'm curious to know what you guys think. So let me know in the comments. Do you think music is a language? And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so that you can stay up to date with my latest videos. See you guys in the next one.